So picture this. You're rushing out the front door.
Oh, I know this feeling already.
Yeah, you're running a few minutes late. And you reach into your right coat pocket, and you feel that distinct, hard, rectangular shape.
Right.
You don't even need to look down. You have this absolute, just unquestioning certainty that you've grabbed your smartphone.
Of course.
I mean, your brain registers the tactile feedback, it checks the box, and you lock the door behind you. But then you get to your car, you pull the object out to, check your GPS, and you realize you are staring at your television remote.
Oh, no. That is the worst.
It's a terrible feeling. But think about it. A moment ago, your psychological certainty was sitting comfortably at 100%. Like the feeling of knowing was flawless.
Right. But the belief itself was entirely false.
Exactly. And that is exactly where we're starting today. Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Because today we are taking that highly unsettling feeling of being absolutely sure and absolutely wrong, and we're kind of, well, blowing it up to a cosmic scale.
We really are.
The big question is, can you ever truly, undeniably know anything for certain?
It is, it's the ultimate philosophical rabbit hole, and honestly, a highly necessary one for where we are currently situated in our broader series.
Yeah, that's perfect context for everyone tracking our progress.
Yeah.
This is the 7th deep dive of our ongoing philosophy series, and we are still very much in the first act of our 4-part journey.
Which is so important to emphasize.
It is, because before we can responsibly dive into, specific historical thinkers or start analyzing those incredibly complex ethical systems we use to judge right and wrong, we have to establish the baseline rules of reality.
We are deep in the trenches of epistemology right now.
Exactly. The study of how we know what we know.
Yeah.
Because, you can't debate what is good or bad if you can't even prove that the world you're living in actually exists.
No, you really can't. And to tackle this today, we have synthesized a rather intimidating stack of academic literature.
Oh, as a mountain.
Yeah, a literal mountain. We're pulling from really comprehensive entries in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, alongside specialized papers on ancient skepticism, modern pragmatism, and fallibilism.
So we've got all the heavy hitters.
We do. And our central mission here is to construct a definitive guide to human certainty. We want to figure out if there is a way to separate the mere psychological feeling of confidence.
Like holding that TV remote.
Exactly, like the remote. To separate that from actual, undeniable, objective truth.
Right. And to avoid just, spinning our wheels for the next hour, we need to clarify what we actually mean by the word certainty. Because the literature we analyze draws very sharp boundaries between 3 distinct dimensions of certainty.
And blurring these lines is usually what causes philosophical arguments to just completely derail into shouting matches.
So true. So the first dimension is objective certainty. This is the realm of propositions that are necessarily structurally true. Like the classic textbook example is, all bachelors are unmarried.
Which is true by definition. It is logically impossible for that statement to be false because the very concept of a bachelor contains the concept of being unmarried.
Right.
So objective certainty doesn't rely on human observation at all. It just relies on the internal logic of the statement itself.
Got it. Then the second dimension is what I experienced with the TV remote, which is psychological certainty. And this one is entirely subjective.
Completely.
It's just a biological and emotional state of absolute conviction. You are entirely free from conscious doubt, regardless of whether that confidence is actually tethered to reality. Like, you can be psychologically certain that the earth is flat or that your lottery ticket is a winner.
Right. The brain just manufactures a feeling of total assurance.
Which highlights the immense danger of relying on our feelings as a barometer for truth.
Right.
Your nervous system literally doesn't know the difference between a deeply held delusion and a hard fact.
And that brings us to the third dimension, which is really the ultimate gold standard we are chasing today, epistemic certainty.
The Holy Grail.
Exactly. This occurs only when your psychological certainty is fully warranted by your objective epistemic position.
Meaning you feel absolutely confident and you possess every rational, evidential, and logical right to feel that way.
Yes. Your internal map perfectly matches the external territory, and you have the proof of the match.
Right. But the real question is whether human beings are actually equipped to reach that. And to understand our modern obsession with finding that absolute truth, I really think we have to look at the origins of the search, which takes us all the way back to ancient Greece.
It does. And the literature reveals something entirely counterintuitive about this.
Yeah, because today we treat doubt as a virus,
Yeah.
right? It's this terrifying anomaly that we try to cure with data and science.
Yeah.
But the ancients viewed doubt as a permanent, peaceful way of life.
The linguistic roots actually give that away immediately. The Greek word skepsis literally translates to investigation or inquiry.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we tend to use the word skeptic today to describe a cynic, someone who aggressively denies things. But the original skeptics were simply inquirers who never stopped looking.
They were fiercely devoted to the search for truth, even if that search perpetually ended without a final answer. Like, they were the ultimate cold case detectives.
That's a great way to put it.
They just refused to close a file just because it felt comfortable to have an answer.
Now, our sources break this Hellenistic movement down into two primary schools that handled this eternal investigation in slightly different ways. First, we have the academic skeptics, famously associated with Arcesilaus, operating out of Plato's Academy.
Right, and the academic skeptics, they really focused their attacks on the Stoics.
Okay, remind us what the Stoics believed here.
So the Stoics believed in what they called cognitive grasp. It's this idea that certain mental representations are so clear, so vivid, and so distinct that they essentially guarantee their own truth.
And Arcesilaus was just not having that. Not at all. He denied this entirely. He argued that you can always have a false impression that feels exactly as vivid as a true one.
Much like my TV remote.
Exactly like your remote. Therefore, he concluded, absolute objective knowledge of the world is fundamentally impossible.
But they didn't just sit in a dark room paralyzed by indecision.
Right.
Right. I mean, Arcesilaus realized that human beings still have to navigate the world. We have to eat, we have to vote, build houses.
Exactly. So he introduced the concept of the Pythanon, which translates roughly to the plausible or the probable.
Okay.
So we can't know for absolute certain that, say, this bread isn't poisoned, but it is highly plausible that it's just regular bread. So we use that probability to guide our daily choices.
It seems like a very pragmatic compromise, honestly.
All day.
But then you have the second major school, the Pyrrhonian skeptics, championed later by Sextus Empiricus,
Oh.
and they view the academic skeptics as absolute failure.
Oh, yeah. They accuse them of slipping backward into the very dogmatism they claim to hate.
And I found the Pyrrhonian critique here to be kind of brilliant. They
Mhm.
essentially pointed out that loudly declaring, we know for certain that nothing can be known for certain is a massive structural contradiction.
It's a huge contradiction.
Right. It is a negative dogma, but it is still a dogma. You are still making a definitive claim about the fundamental nature of the universe.
And the Pyrrhonians wanted to escape all claims about the universe. Their goal was a total suspension of judgment, a state they called epiche.
Epiche.
Yeah. They suspended judgment on literally everything, including the question of whether knowledge itself was possible. They wouldn't even commit to the idea that they couldn't commit.
See, that level of cognitive detachment sounds almost superhuman to me. How does a normal person actually train their brain to suspend judgment on reality itself?
Well, they engineered a highly specific, rigorous methodology for it, centered on this practice of isosthenia.
Which is what exactly?
It's the active, deliberate balancing of equal and opposing arguments. So whenever a Pyrrhonian encountered a claim, say, the soul is immortal, they wouldn't just accept or reject it. They would actively seek out or even construct an argument of equal weight that the soul is mortal.
So they intentionally forced a tie.
Yes. They created a mental gridlock where the evidence for X and the evidence against X were so perfectly balanced that the mind simply couldn't make a choice.
Wow. And in that forced surrender, when the mind finally stops fighting to establish dominance over the truth, they claim to achieve ataraxia.
Ataraxia, mental tranquility.
A profound, untroubled peace. It's fascinating.
They diagnosed dogmatism, this desperate, white-knuckled clinging to beliefs and truth claims, as the root cause of all human anxiety and mental turmoil.
So by giving up the fight to definitively know the underlying nature of reality, you free yourself from the fear of being wrong. You drop the need to defend your ego, and you avoid conflict with people who hold different dogmas.
It sounds incredibly therapeutic in theory, right?
It does. But this naturally triggers the most famous counterattack against the skeptics, which the academic sources refer to as the apraxia charge.
The apraxia charge.
Yeah, the dogmatists of the ancient world looked at the Pyrrhonians and essentially said, you guys are lying. Like, if you truly, honestly hold absolutely no beliefs, you are fundamentally incapable of action. Belief is the engine of behavior.
Right. If you don't believe food nourishes you, you just won't eat.
Exactly. If you don't believe a cloud is real, you'll walk right off it. You would die.
It is the ultimate practical objection.
Yeah.
How does a skeptic navigate a physical environment without committing to beliefs about that environment?
So how do they defend themselves?
The Pyrrhonian defense is actually incredibly nuanced. They claimed they could live a doxostos, which means without belief, by relying entirely on what they called appearances or fantasia.
Okay, this requires careful parsing.
Right.
Because they aren't claiming the wall in front of them possesses an objective metaphysical reality, right?
No, not at all. They are saying, I am currently experiencing the appearance of a wall, so my body is going to walk around the appearance of the wall.
Okay, I see.
And they formalize this into a fourfold path for daily living. First, they allow themselves to be guided by the natural inclinations of their senses and instincts.
So just reacting to the world.
Right. Second, they obey the unavoidable compulsions of their biology, like they drink when they experience the sensation of thirst.
Makes sense.
Third, they conform to local laws and customs, but purely out of convenience, not out of moral conviction. And fourth, they practice whatever technical skills or trades they've been taught.
And they execute all these actions without ever stepping behind the curtain to declare that the objects they interact with are objectively real.
Exactly. When asked about their world, they speak strictly as chroniclers or historicos. They merely report the current state of their sensory input without making universal claims.
You know, I am still struggling to buy this distinction. It feels like a brilliant linguistic loophole that just completely falls apart under pressure.
How do you mean?
Consider a life or death scenario. A massive runaway bus is hurtling toward a Pyrrhonian skeptic.
Yeah.
They experience the appearance of the bus, and their instinct forces them to dive out of the way.
Okay.
Isn't the very act of violently throwing your body onto the sidewalk definitive empirical proof that you deeply fundamentally believe the bus is a real physical threat? How can you possibly separate biological survival instinct from a philosophical belief in reality?
That tension is precisely why ancient skepticism remains so heavily debated in modern epistemology. But the scholar Michael Fried offers a crucial intervention here.
What does he say?
He argues that we have to radically separate two cognitive events, having a thought forced upon you by immediate experience versus actively endorsing that thought as an absolute truth about the universe.
Oh, I see.
When the bus is bearing down on you, the terrifying appearance of the bus forces a reaction. The skeptic acts on that forced impression. What the skeptic withholds is the secondary intellectual step of endorsing the claim. Buses are objectively real entities that exist independent of my perception.
So they basically dive out of the way, adrenaline pumping, dust themselves off and say, I was just overwhelmed by a very aggressive appearance of a large metal object moving rapidly through my visual field, but I refuse to make any ontological commitments about whether buses exist when I'm not looking at them.
That captures the attitude perfectly, yes. And it is vital to understand that this isn't merely an ancient historical curiosity. The literature highlights significant modern revivals of this tradition.
Right, particularly among Latin American philosophers who view Neo-Pyrrhonism as this robust, incredibly useful stance, like Oswaldo Porchat, for instance.
Yes, Porchat argues that skepticism shouldn't be confined to thought experiments in university classrooms. He views it as a genuinely plausible, overarching attitude for navigating contemporary life. It just strips away dogmatic baggage and ideological rigidity.
And then Armando Cintora takes this even further, applying it directly to the engine of modern truth, which is the scientific method. He advocates for methodological Pyrrhonism.
Right. Cintora's argument is that scientists actively benefit from a skeptical mindset. If a scientist remains constantly aware of the provisional, non-dogmatic nature of their own theories, even their most cherished principles, they remain free from ideological capture.
They utilize scientific models because those models appear to work and yield predictable results, not because those models represent the final, unquestionable truth of the cosmos.
Exactly. This flexibility is what allows science to discard old theories when better ones arrive.
So the ancients utilized doubt to achieve mental peace, and modern Neo-Pyrrhonians utilize it to maintain intellectual flexibility.
Yeah.
And they both succeed by simply letting go of the desperate need for absolute certainty.
But historically, the era sandwiched between them, the modern era, they refused to let go.
Oh, absolutely refused. We move from doubt as a lifestyle choice to doubt as a weapon of mass intellectual destruction. And the architect of this demolition is René Descartes.
Descartes initiates a massive tectonic shift in philosophy. When he publishes his meditations on first philosophy in 1641, he has zero interest in ataraxia.
No mental peace for him.
No, he isn't looking for tranquility at all. He is looking for architectural perfection. He wants to establish foundationalism. He believed that the sciences of his day were built on a swamp of inherited assumptions, bad logic, and faulty sensory data.
I think the best way to visualize Descartes' project is to imagine playing a game of Jenga, but in reverse.
Okay, I like that.
Normally, you start with a built tower, and you carefully pull blocks out, praying the structure holds. Descartes looks at the towering structure of human knowledge, like everything his parents taught him, everything he learned in school, every piece of sensory data he ever recorded.
And decides that the entire thing is wobbly.
Exactly. So he decides to purposefully yank out every single block of assumption, intentionally collapsing the entire tower, and then sifting through the rubble until he finds one single indestructible block at the bottom. His plan is to then rebuild a perfect tower upon that single point.
That captures the essence of his method of doubt perfectly. He weaponized what is known as hyperbolic or universal skepticism.
Meaning he took it to the extreme.
The absolute extreme. His rule of engagement was, if a belief is vulnerable to even the slightest, most microscopic theoretical uncertainty, it must be treated as entirely false and aggressively discarded.
And he started the demolition with his own body. He attacked the reliability of his senses using the dream argument.
Yes. Descartes noted a very common human experience. He had vividly dreamed on multiple occasions of sitting by his fire, wearing his winter gown, feeling the heat, when in reality he was fast asleep, naked in his bed.
We've all had those dreams that feel entirely real.
Right. And because the human brain is capable of perfectly simulating waking life during a dream state, he realized there are no definitive, foolproof markers to distinguish being awake from being asleep.
So if that is true, then any knowledge derived from sensory experience could just be a complex hallucination.
Exactly.
That pulls out a massive chunk of our Jenga tower. All empirical observation, all science based on observation, all physical evidence, just gone. But he doesn't stop there.
No, he realizes that even in a dream, 2 + 2 still equals 4, and a square still has 4 sides.
So he takes his sledgehammer to mathematics and logic itself. And this is where he introduces the most terrifying thought experiment in philosophy, the evil demon hypothesis.
This is where hyperbolic doubt achieves maximum velocity. Descartes asks us to imagine an entity with the power of a god, but entirely malicious and deceitful, an evil demon.
Okay.
What if this entity's sole purpose is to deceive Descartes? What if every single time Descartes performs a basic mathematical operation, like adding 2 and 2, this demon reaches into his mind and manipulates his cognitive faculties?
So that he feels absolute psychological certainty that the answer is 4, when in reality it's something else entirely.
Exactly. If such a demon is even logically conceivable, then human reason itself is hopelessly compromised.
It is weaponized paranoia. And the academic sources draw a direct line from Descartes' demon to contemporary analytic philosophy's favorite nightmare, which is the brain in a vat hypothesis.
Right, the BIV scenario. This updates Descartes for the science fiction age, basically stripping away the theological baggage. It poses a very simple scenario. How can you definitively prove that you're not currently a disembodied brain floating in a vat of nutrient-rich fluid hooked up to a supercomputer by a team of malicious scientists?
It's the Matrix, essentially.
Exactly. These scientists are feeding your brain complex electrical impulses that perfectly, flawlessly simulate the experience of having a body sitting in a chair and listening to this deep dive.
And the terrifying part is that if the simulation is perfect, the electrical signals my brain receives from my actual eyes and ears are mathematically identical to the signals the supercomputer would feed into the vat.
Yes.
There's no internal test I can run to tell the difference.
And this scenario is incredibly dangerous because it exploits a fundamental rule of logic that our sources highlight, the principle of epistemic closure.
Let's define that for everyone.
Okay. The principle states that if you know a proposition P, and you know that P logically entails proposition Q, then you must also know Q.
Let's break that down without the variables. If I know that I am currently holding a ceramic coffee mug, and I know that holding a coffee mug entails that I possess physical human hands, then I must necessarily know that I have physical hands. It's just basic deduction.
Exactly. But the skeptic uses this exact rule of inference to trap us. They apply it to the brain in a vat.
How so?
They argue if you know you have physical hands, you must logically know that you are not a disembodied brain in a vat. However, as we just established, because the vat simulation would feel entirely identical to reality, you cannot possibly know you aren't a brain in a vat.
Oh, I see.
Therefore, running the logic in reverse via modus tollens, you cannot know you have physical hands. The skeptic uses our own logical rules to pull out the last remaining blocks of the tower.
Wow. So Descartes has successfully demolished his entire universe. He is sitting in a void of total uncertainty. He can't trust his eyes, his memories, or his math. How does he survive his own trap? Where is his Archimedean point, that one indestructible foundation block?
He discovers it inside the very machinery of the deception itself.
Oh, how?
He realizes that even if he is trapped in a dream, and even if an omnipotent evil demon is manipulating his every waking thought, there is one absolute prerequisite for deception. There must be a subject experiencing the deception.
The demon cannot deceive a non-entity.
Exactly. If Descartes is doubting, he must exist to cast the doubt. This culminates in his legendary formulation, Cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am.
It's an incredible intellectual escape hatch. The very act of questioning reality proves the existence of the questioner. The demon's power is neutralized by the structure of thought itself.
And from this single, unassailable Cogito, Descartes attempts this massive project of rebuilding the Jenga tower of human knowledge. But the literature draws a critical distinction in how Descartes categorizes his knowledge during this reconstruction. He divides it into cognitio and scientia.
This distinction feels crucial because, honestly, the Cogito only seems to work in the exact second you're actually thinking about it.
You've hit the exact limitation of cognitio right there. Cognitio is a fleeting, isolated, momentary certainty. When Descartes concentrates intensely on the cogito, he possesses unshakable certainty in that specific fraction of a second.
Right.
But the moment his attention drifts to something else, the hyperfocus breaks, and the demonic doubt could potentially seep back in regarding his memory of having just proven his existence.
So what is scientia then?
Scientia is systemic, enduring, structural certainty. It is knowledge integrated into a stable framework that remains true even when you aren't actively focusing on it. And to upgrade his knowledge from the fragile state of cognitio to the robust state of scientia, Descartes realized he needed external help. He dedicated the rest of his meditations to proving the existence of a perfectly benevolent God.
A God who would not allow our clear, distinct, rational perceptions to be systematically manipulated by a demon.
Precise.
So he uses the Cogito to prove God, and then uses God to guarantee the reliability of science and math. But if we are honest, a vast majority of modern philosophers find that second part of his project deeply unconvincing.
Very much so.
Which leads us to the next massive roadblock. Because even if we hand Descartes his Cogito, even if we concede, fine, I exist right now in this present moment as a thinking thing, that tells me absolutely nothing about the external world. And more importantly, it tells me nothing about what happens next.
Right.
We have to cross the bridge from the internal certainty of the mind to the external uncertainty of the physical universe.
And waiting on that bridge is the Scottish philosopher David Hume, holding a conceptual explosive device that has haunted the scientific method ever since, the problem of induction.
I want to paint a vivid picture for everyone listening to illustrate Hume's trap. Imagine a turkey born on a sprawling, comfortable farm.
A classic analogy.
On the very first morning of its life, the farmer walks out to the pen and scatters delicious feed on the ground. The turkey eats. On day 2, the same thing happens. The farmer appears, the food arrives. The turkey's neural pathways begin to form a pattern.
Right.
By day 100, the turkey is confident. By day 364, the turkey possesses massive, overwhelming, empirically verified inductive evidence that the appearance of the farmer equals the arrival of food. The turkey is acting scientifically. But on day 365, Thanksgiving morning, the farmer walks out with an axe instead of feed. The fundamental uniformity of the turkey's universe breaks catastrophically. The horrifying question Hume poses to humanity is, how can we rationally prove that we aren't the turkey?
It's chilling. The profound vulnerability Hume exposed here targets what philosophers call the principle of the uniformity of nature, or PUN. This is the bedrock assumption underlying all human behavior and all scientific inquiry. It is the belief that the future will resemble the past, that unobserved instances will conform to the patterns of observed instances.
It is the assumption that the floor won't turn into a liquid when I take my next step, or that the pharmaceutical drug that cured an infection yesterday won't suddenly become a deadly poison tomorrow. We stake our lives on the uniformity of nature millions of times a day.
Yet Hume sets an inescapable logical trap here. He demands that we justify this reliance. He asks, how can you definitively prove the principle of the uniformity of nature?
How do you even start?
Well, logically, you only have two avenues available. You must prove it either deductively or inductively.
Okay, let's test the deductive avenue first. Deductive logic is about necessary truths, where the conclusion is absolutely guaranteed by the premises. Like, if all men are mortal and Socrates is a man, Socrates is mortal.
Exactly. So, can you prove the uniformity of nature deductively? Hume argues it is impossible,
Why?
because the hallmark of a deductive truth is that its opposite contains a logical contradiction. You cannot imagine a four-sided triangle.
Right.
But there is absolutely no logical contradiction in imagining the laws of physics spontaneously altering.
Oh, wow.
It is entirely logically conceivable that tomorrow gravity reverses and objects fall upwards into the sky. Because a sudden change in nature is logically possible, the uniformity of nature cannot be a necessary deductive truth.
So the front door is locked. Deductive reasoning can't help us. That leaves the inductive avenue. We try to prove it by pointing at history. We say, look at the data, Hume. Nature has always operated uniformly in the past, therefore it will operate uniformly in the future.
And that is where the jaws of the trap snap completely shut.
It's circular, isn't it?
That argument is inherently viciously circular. You are using past experience to justify your reliance on past experience. You are employing induction to prove the validity of induction.
It is a logical equivalent of a known con artist asking you to trust them, and when you ask for references, they hand you a character reference letter they wrote for themselves.
Yes, the proof assumes the very premise it is trying to establish.
So we are totally paralyzed. This creates a terrifying space that the literature refers to as the logical gap.
The logical gap represents the unbridgeable void between observed phenomena, meaning the limited data set of things we have actually experienced in the past, and unobserved phenomena, which is the infinite expanse of the future.
Right.
No matter how many millions of times you observe a pen dropping to the floor, the premises of those observations do not contain the logical power to guarantee that the pen will fall on the next attempt. The gap cannot be closed by logic.
So does Hume expect us to just huddle in a corner, paralyzed by the fear that the sun won't rise tomorrow? How did he personally function after discovering this?
Hume was actually remarkably grounded. He was a deep pragmatist regarding human psychology. He conceded that biologically we are hardwired to make inductive leaps. We cannot help but believe the sun will rise.
So our biology overrides our philosophy.
Exactly. Our animal instincts override our philosophical doubts. Nature, he famously wrote, is always too strong for principle. But epistemologically, he forced the world to admit a humbling truth. Our reliance on science and experience is based on custom, habit, and psychological instinct, not on infallible rational certainty.
This devastating realization birthed a major shift in the literature, leading to the concept of fallibilism.
Yes.
If Hume's logical gap is real, and the future is never mathematically guaranteed by the past, then it means that no empirical belief about the physical world can ever be supported in a conclusively infallible way.
Fallibilism is really a profound maturity in epistemological thought. It is the concession that absolute, objective Cartesian certainty regarding the empirical universe is simply beyond human capability.
But they aren't skeptics.
No, fallibilists refuse to surrender to skepticism. They don't throw their hands up and conclude that knowledge is impossible. Instead, they redefine the parameters of knowledge. They argue that we can possess justified fallible belief, and we are entirely rational in categorizing that as knowledge.
They realize the turkey might always get the axe. But based on the overwhelming weight of evidence, it is vastly more rational for the turkey to believe the farmer brings food than to constantly anticipate the axe. It's about operating on heavily justified probabilities rather than demanding absolute guarantees.
It is a highly functional compromise. But for many philosophers, conceding that the skeptic even has a valid point about the logical gap feels like surrendering the castle.
They want to fight.
They do. The desire to actively defeat the skeptic, rather than just compromise with them, leads to a fascinating era of pushback.
Yeah, the frustration of dealing with brain-of-adz scenarios and unprovable sunrises eventually cause everyday sanity to strike back. Enter the British philosopher G.E. Moore.
Moore is brilliant.
The sheer audacity of Moore's approach is legendary. In a famous 1939 lecture appropriately titled Proof of an External World, Moore stands before an audience of academics who are deeply steeped in Cartesian doubt. And to settle the debate about whether the external world exists, he physically holds up one of his hands and declares, "Here is one hand."
Simple as that.
Then he holds up his other hand and says, "And here is another." He concludes that because two external objects clearly exist, the external world exists. Skepticism defeated. He essentially drops the mic and walks off.
To a layman, it sounds laughably simplistic, almost anti-philosophical. But Moore's maneuver, which has been immortalized as the Moore shift, is a highly calculated, strategic inversion of the skeptic's logic.
Okay, let's look at the underlying mechanics then.
So, the skeptic presents a conditional argument. If skepticism is true, meaning we could be brains in vats, then common sense is false, meaning you don't actually know you have hands.
And the logic of the conditional holds up.
Right, Moore agrees entirely with the conditional structure. But instead of accepting the skeptic's premise and letting it destroy common sense, Moore flips the directional flow of the argument.
Oh.
He leverages his intense psychological and epistemic certainty in his immediate reality. He says, I know, with vastly more absolute conviction than I could ever possibly have in any highly abstract, convoluted philosophical argument about a theoretical demon, that I have two hands. My knowledge of common sense is rock solid. Therefore, because common sense is true, skepticism must be false. He turns a modus ponens into a modus tollens.
I understand the logical flip there, but I have to aggressively push back on Moore here, because it feels like he is completely missing the foundational premise of the brain in a vat thought experiment.
That's a massive category error.
Let's hear it.
If I am a disembodied brain floating in a vat, the supercomputer is feeding my neural pathways the precise sensation of raising two hands and speaking the words, here is a hand. The simulation of the proof is identical to the reality of the proof. Moore hasn't empirically proven anything. He's just stubbornly refusing to play the game by the rules Descartes established.
You are echoing the exact vehement critique leveled against Moore by generations of philosophers.
I'm not alone.
Not at all. They accuse him of viciously begging the question. He is utilizing the reliability of his physical senses, his eyes seeing his hands, to prove the reliability of his physical senses. It is circular.
However, Moore's deeper point is about the comparative weight of rationality. He is challenging us to weigh two competing claims on a scale. On one side, you have your direct, overwhelming, multisensory experience of your own body interacting with the world. On the other side, you have a highly speculative, invisible, untestable hypothesis about a deceitful demon.
Oh.
Moore argues that it is fundamentally irrational to allow a weak theoretical speculation to override a massive, concrete, experiential reality.
So it is a battle of plausibility, and Moore is just betting the house on the obvious. But while Moore tried to brute force his way through skepticism, another thinker took this defense of common sense and refined it into something much more systemic and profound.
Ludwig Wittgenstein.
Yes, in his final collection of notes, published posthumously as Uncertainty, he introduces what I think is the most illuminating metaphor in this entire epistemological journey, the concept of hinges.
Wittgenstein's hinge metaphor radically recontextualizes how we view doubt. He observes that all forms of human inquiry, all rational debates, all scientific experiments, they all function like a moving door.
Okay, a door.
A door must swing open and shut to be useful. But in order for a door to move smoothly, it must be securely attached to hinges. And crucially, those hinges must remain entirely fixed and unmoving.
Because you cannot have a functional swinging door if the hinges themselves are constantly moving around the door frame. The movement relies on the stillness.
Exactly. Wittgenstein argued that certain foundational propositions serve as the unmoving hinges for the rest of our cognitive lives. These are propositions like, human beings have bodies, or the earth existed for a long time before my birth, or even the basic assumption that the words I am speaking have consistent meaning.
But we don't arrive at those through science, right?
No, we do not arrive at these beliefs through rigorous scientific investigation or logical deduction. Rather, they constitute the invisible, unquestioned background framework against which all investigation, all testing, and all doubting become possible.
So he is exposing radical skepticism, the act of trying to doubt absolutely everything simultaneously, as a practical impossibility. It is senseless.
It really is.
Because the very act of playing the game of doubt requires you to take massive chunks of reality for granted. If you formulate an argument that the external world doesn't exist, you are still relying on the hinge assumption that the language you are using to make the argument has real shared meaning with the person you are talking to.
Precisely. To doubt everything is to doubt nothing, because doubt requires a structure to house it. Imagine a student in a classroom who constantly interrupts the teacher to ask, but does that textbook really exist? Do I exist? Do the sounds coming out of your mouth have any relation to reality?
That sounds incredibly annoying.
Right. That student isn't being a profound philosopher. They are demonstrating a fundamental inability to participate in the enterprise of learning. The mechanism of doubt breaks down without a foundation of unquestioned certainty.
Now, the academic sources highlight a major divide in how modern philosophers interpret what Wittgenstein actually meant by these hinges. There are two primary camps, the non-epistemic reading and the framework reading.
The non-epistemic reading, which is championed by scholars like Peter Strawson and Avram Stroll, leans heavily into biology. They suggest that our relationship with these hinge propositions shouldn't even be classified as knowledge.
Why not?
Because knowledge implies a process of learning, testing, and concluding. But our certainty about the ground beneath our feet isn't rational. It is a primal, unreflective, instinctual certainty. It is animalistic.
I really love that framing. A bird doesn't require a philosophical treatise on structural engineering before it decides to build a nest. It just builds. A human infant doesn't need deductive proof of gravity to learn to walk. The certainty is baked into the hardware of the organism.
In this view, Cartesian skepticism isn't just philosophically annoying, it is biologically unnatural. It attempts to intellectualize a certainty that operates entirely beneath the level of propositional logic.
And the other view.
Contrast this with the framework reading, advocated by scholars like Marie McGinn. She approaches hinges not as animal instincts, but essentially as rules of grammar.
Okay, when she says grammar, she obviously doesn't mean where to place a semicolon in a sentence, right?
No, she is using Wittgenstein's broader, more structural definition of grammar. These are the underlying rules that define our techniques of description, measurement, and investigation. Consider the rules of mathematics. We don't conduct empirical field tests to confirm that 12 times 12 equals 144.
You just accept it.
That equation operates as a rule that allows us to measure other things. Similarly, the proposition physical objects exist operates as a fundamental rule for the game of empirical science. You cannot empirically test or doubt these rules because you are actively utilizing them to perform the test itself. They are the cognitive scaffolding.
This circles perfectly back to Moore. Under McGinn's framework reading, Moore's mistake wasn't his belief in his hands. His mistake was treating a hinge proposition like it was an empirical fact that required a proof.
Exactly. You don't try to prove a hinge.
The hinge is the tool used to prove other things. It's like trying to use a tape measure to measure the exact length of that same tape measure. It's a category error.
Attempting to measure the measuring tape is a beautiful way to summarize the flaw of foundationalism. We have to accept the tape measure as a given to build the house.
But that leaves us with a massive practical challenge. If Wittgenstein is right, and we simply have to blindly accept the hinges of reality to function, how do we actually go about figuring out the rest of the murky, confusing world?
We need a system.
Right. We need an operational system that acknowledges the truth of Hume's fallibility, that we can never have absolute proof of the future, but still manages to get actual measurable results. We need to build a society. And this leads us to the final evolution in our journey, pragmatism.
Pragmatism executes a brilliant pivot. It stops asking the paralyzing question, what is the absolute foundational infallible truth? And starts asking a functional question. What is the most effective, reliable method for resolving doubt and fixing belief?
Charles Sanders Peirce is the architect of this shift.
Right. Yes. In his seminal essay, The Fixation of Belief, he catalogs the 4 distinct methods that human beings and societies use to rid themselves of what he calls the irritation of doubt.
The irritation of doubt. That phrasing instantly echoes the ancient Pyrrhonians. They viewed doubt as a psychological turmoil, an anxiety that needed to be escaped. Peirce is mapping out how humanity actually attempts that escape in the real world.
Exactly. And his first category is the most common default setting for human psychology, the method of tenacity.
Think about your own digital life for a moment. When you were scrolling through your social media feed, engaging with political news or cultural commentary, are you actively searching for objective truth? Or are you operating within the method of tenacity?
I think we all know the answer.
Tenacity is when an individual rigidly clings to a belief they already fancy, actively and aggressively avoids any contrary evidence, and treats anything that disturbs their established worldview with contempt and anger. You build an echo chamber to protect yourself from the irritation of doubt.
It is highly effective for maintaining short-term psychological certainty. But Peirce argues that the method of tenacity ultimately inevitably fails due to what he calls the social impulse.
Because humans are social creatures.
Right. Eventually, the tenacious individual will step outside their bubble and encounter other rational, intelligent human beings who hold entirely different, fundamentally contradictory beliefs. When they witness the firm conviction of others, it shakes their own confidence. The isolation breaks and doubt creeps back in.
So individual stubbornness shatters upon contact with a diverse reality. How does society respond to that?
They move to Peirce's second method, the method of authority. If individual bubbles fail, the solution is to force everyone into one giant unified bubble.
This is the historical standard. The method of authority occurs when a powerful institution, like a totalitarian state, a dominant religion, or a rigid cultural tradition, dictates dogma from the top down.
Yes.
It enforces uniformity of belief through education, law, and often violence, punishing any dissent that might introduce doubt.
It is incredibly effective for building cohesive empires and maintaining social order, but it is a terrible engine for discovering objective reality.
Because you can't question it.
Exactly. And Peirce points out its fatal flaw. No institution, no matter how powerful or ruthless, can perfectly regulate every single belief of every single citizen forever. The cracks always appear.
Right.
Eventually, members of that society will read unauthorized history, or they will travel and interact with outside cultures. They will realize that their supposedly absolute divine dogmas are actually just historically and geographically arbitrary accidents of birth. The illusion of universal consensus shatters and doubt returns.
Which forces intellectuals to search for a better way, leading to the third method, the a priori method.
The a priori method attempts to elevate belief above brute force and blind tradition. It suggests we should adopt beliefs that are agreeable to reason. We use our logic, our intuition, and our philosophical deduction to construct grand systems that feel intellectually satisfying and coherent.
This was the preferred method of many classical philosophers, including Descartes.
It was.
And it sounds infinitely more civilized than authority or tenacity.
It is more civilized, but Peirce identifies a devastating weakness. Human intuition is hopelessly subjective. What feels agreeable to reason changes based on cultural trends. It turns the search for truth into a matter of intellectual fashion.
That makes total sense.
What seemed intuitively obvious and logically undeniable to a brilliant thinker in the 14th century might seem completely absurd to a thinker in the 21st century. Because the a priori method relies entirely on internal, subjective reasoning, it lacks an external anchor to resolve disagreements.
Which sets the stage for Peirce's ultimate solution, the fourth method, the method of science.
The method of science stands entirely apart from the other three because it is the only method predicated on what Peirce calls the hypothesis of reality.
Meaning what?
It fundamentally assumes that there are mind-independent regularities in the universe. It posits that there is an external world that operates completely regardless of what we wish, what the authorities dictate, or what our intuition tells us. And crucially, it assumes that by interacting systematically with this external world, our beliefs will be forcibly corrected over time.
The external world acts as the ultimate unbiased judge. You can passionately believe, using the method of tenacity, that you can fly. But when you step off the roof, the external world will brutally correct your belief.
Exactly. And the most beautiful aspect of the method of science is that it does not claim to possess absolute, infallible Cartesian certainty. Science inherently embraces fallibilism.
It knows it can be wrong.
Yes. It acknowledges that its current models might be flawed, but because it is a self-correcting process, continuously testing hypotheses against the unforgiving friction of physical reality, it systematically grinds away errors. It converges on the truth over time.
It abandons the desperate need to be perfectly right on the very first try and replaces it with a methodology designed to be progressively less wrong.
Exactly.
But Peirce was highly focused on the cognitive domain. Physics, chemistry, logic. Reality isn't always that clean. Another giant of pragmatism, William James, realized that we have to make decisions in incredibly messy, non-cognitive domains where science cannot provide immediate answers.
William James vastly expanded the pragmatic framework with his concept of the will to believe. He argued that Peirce's strict, austere requirement for scientific evidence is far too narrow to encompass the totality of human experience.
Right.
In areas like morality, ethics, interpersonal relationships, or religion, the empirical evidence is often perpetually inconclusive. Yet life forces us to make a choice. To not choose is, in itself, a choice. In these specific high-stakes scenarios, James argued that belief operates as an adaptive, evolutionary tool for conduct.
We have to unpack the mechanics of that. How does a belief become a tool? Let's take the concept of human free will. We cannot definitively prove in a laboratory setting that human beings possess libertarian free will.
We can't.
We might just be complex biological algorithms reacting to stimuli. But if I adopt the belief that I have free will, it fundamentally changes my conduct. It makes me hold myself accountable, it motivates me to strive for improvement, and it creates the foundation for a functioning justice system. The belief generates practical, measurable, positive consequences in my life.
Under James's pragmatism, if adopting that belief helps you navigate the complexities of existence effectively and yields fruitful consequences, then that belief possesses a pragmatic truth value. It works.
That's a fascinating way to look at it.
And this evolutionary framing of knowledge is taken to its logical conclusion by later philosophers highlighted in the sources, such as Karl Popper and Elizabeth Cook. They developed an evolutionary epistemology.
It is essentially Darwinian natural selection applied to ideas instead of animals.
That is the exact mechanism. Popper viewed all human knowledge as guesswork. We generate hypotheses to solve problems, but we subject those guesses to severe, rigorous, highly aggressive empirical testing.
And the weak ideas die out.
Yes, the weak ideas, the false hypotheses, the bad guesses, they die off in the testing phase. We don't need absolute infallible certainty to make rational progress. We just need a system that kills off our errors before those errors kill us. Knowledge is not a static fortress built on immovable foundation stones. It is a dynamic, ongoing, evolutionary process of adaptation.
Wow. Let's pull this entire massive journey into a cohesive picture for a second. We started in the sun-drenched agoras of ancient Greece, watching the Pyrrhonians perform incredible mental gymnastics, perpetually balancing opposing arguments to suspend all belief, hoping to quiet the mind and find peace in a chaotic world.
We then witnessed the dawn of the modern era, where Descartes weaponized doubt. We watched him intentionally collapse the Jenga tower of reality, utilizing the terror of the evil demon to strip away everything until he found the solitary, indestructible anchor of the Cogito.
But that anchor trapped him in the present moment. We hit the brick wall of David Hume's inductive skepticism. We realized that observing the farmer bring food for 364 days provides zero logical guarantee against the axe on day 365. The future is an unmapped void.
Yet we discovered a path through the void. We utilized More's defiant common sense and Wittgenstein's profound metaphor of the hinges to recognize that radical universal doubt is a game that destroys its own rules.
And finally, we landed on the pragmatic engine of Peirce, James, and Popper. We traded the paralyzing demand for absolute divine certainty for the practical power of self-correcting evolutionary fallibilism.
The ultimate synthesis of our deep dive is really this: absolute, infallible, epistemic certainty, the kind of certainty that mathematically guarantees you can never ever be wrong about the physical universe, might simply be biologically and logically impossible for human beings to achieve.
But justified, self-correcting, fallible knowledge is more than sufficient for us to thrive, to cure diseases, to build civilizations, and to map the cosmos.
We must accept that we do not possess a flawless mirror reflecting objective reality. We possess effective habits of action, and we possess the scientific method to correct those habits when they inevitably fail.
Which leaves us with one final, deeply provocative thought to mull over, derived from the evolutionary nature of the source material. As humans, we spend an agonizing amount of time stressing over our lack of 100% certainty. We crave it. We want life to give us a crisp, high-contrast X-ray. We want the universe to point at the jagged white line and definitively say, broken or not broken, binary, safe, guaranteed. But what if the very pursuit of that absolute certainty is actually a structural flaw in our cognitive design?
If the evolutionary pragmatists are right, our brains were not engineered by nature to perfectly capture and catalog absolute metaphysical truths. Our brains evolved primarily as pragmatic engines designed to guide successful actions, survival, and reproduction in a shifting environment.
If that is true, then perhaps our persistent gnawing anxiety over not knowing for sure, that feeling that keeps us awake at night, is just an evolutionary misfiring. It is a phantom limb of the mind. It is our consciousness endlessly grasping for a bedrock foundation that the universe never actually intended us to have. We are torturing ourselves looking for a perfect X-ray in a world that is fundamentally and perhaps beautifully murky. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Keep questioning the appearances, keep correcting your hypotheses, and we'll see you next time.